I'm Kathy from Eclectic Images and welcome to Crafting with Kathy. Okay, today we're going to be doing a scene on gloss card and we're going to be using some of our Australiana stamps and some Kaleidacolor inks and brushes to create a fantastic fiery looking background. Okay, so the stamps we're going to use today are the Kookaburra. We'll use the larger one out of this set. We'll use the Wattle for some edging. And then I'm going to stamp some words on a saying, and I'm going to use the Australia stamp and then just the saying out of the Aussie Country Road, which is a land of beauty and splendour. Then for our ink pads, we'll be using the Catherine Pooler Midnight Black. And then for our colouring, mainly the Desert Heat, but I will be using a little bit of Denim as well. Right, so let's get creating. Now, stamping on gloss card is where it's really good to use something like a Misty or a stamping platform or some other sort of stamping tool because it's quite slippery to stamp onto it. So let's just position I've got my card in the platform. Let's just position our Kookaburra where we would like him to be, leaving room for putting our words down the bottom there. Tuck him up a little bit more, there we go. Now, pick him up with the platform and the card may come away at the same time, because the stamp is sticky, but that's okay because I knew that I had my card pressed into the edges of the platform, so I can easily put it down and know that my stamp is still going to happen where I wanted it to. Let's pick up our Midnight Black and ink very gently. Remember, with something like this ink pad, which is a squishy foam one, remember just to tap really gently, don't press the ink pad. So just tap gently across the whole image. Lower your stamp down and press. It just takes out some of the difficulties that you can have with stamping on gloss card because of it being a slippery surface. Now let's just pick up. There we go. And we've got our beautiful Kookaburra in there. Just position it back in the corner because it had slipped a little bit. So we'll clean the Kookaburra stamp and take it off the platform. I'm just cleaning with a damp kitchen sponge. Peel him off, and now I can position the words and see where I want them to be. So I might stamp in the bottom one first, so I can take time to get that straightened. Make sure my card is still sitting nice and straight in the platform. We'll ink this up also with the Midnight ink. Again, gentle taps across. Beautiful. Take that one off and put our Australia positioned on the card where we think we might want it. So I'm going to tuck it in underneath the Kookaburra's tail. Now, this is quite a sketchy stamp, but I still want to get it looking fairly straight. If you're ever unsure about getting a text stamp straight, stamp it deliberately on an angle, then it doesn't matter. You stay on the platform where you're supposed to, and you stay down here where you're supposed to. Okay, let's make sure that's stuck there, ink it up. And press. Now these inks will dry, this Midnight Black ink will dry on the gloss card. It is recommended to give it a heat set, but it will dry if you give it some time. But even with the heat setting, it still takes a couple of minutes. So I've actually already prepared one that I've stamped ready, so it's had plenty of time to dry, so we can get straight into the colouring. So let's pop our platform to one side. Bring in our card and get colouring. So I can just do a little test on an inconspicuous area, make sure that it's not going to smudge. Maybe I'll try conspicuous area as well. No, all looks good. Okay, so we're ready to go. All right, I'm going to start off using one of our bigger blending brushes to do the softer colour with the Desert Heat. Now I'm just going to move a few things out of the way here. I always like to line up the lid of my ink pad with the ink pad that I'm using, particularly with the Kaleidacolor ones, so you can tell at a glance. This one's quite easy to see the lighter colours through to the darker, but when you get something like Denim, it can be a bit hard to tell which colour's which, so to just help you to remember, it's really good to have that lid nice and close. But we're starting off on this card just with this softer colour on the end. So it's very easy to ink up on our big brush. And then no, before we do that, we do not want to have orange on our Kookaburra. So this is a mask that I've cut, where I've stamped him on a sticky note, a post-it note, and then cut it out. So now I can place that over the top of him, and I'll know that I'm not going to get ink where I don't want to get ink. Let's just wiggle it till I get it into position. Excellent. So now we can start doing our colouring with our softer orange, and we really want to cover the whole card with this. It's going to take a little bit to work that up. Now you have got some movement on the card with the inks, but they still do tend to grab when you first go onto the card. So it is good to start on your scrap and then work into the card rather than just going straight onto it. I've picked up a couple of marks there by going in a little bit quickly, but I'll cover those up to make by making them into clouds as we build up the colour in the scene. So the advantage of these brushes is you can just cover, I love my number 10 and 8 size brushes that I use a lot of, but these bigger brushes means that particularly with the lighter colours that you want to get on first, you can build up your background colour quite quickly. Because we've got the Kookaburra masked, we can take our colour right in close to him. Although because I'm going to place a little shape in there, I don't mind if it's a little bit soft next to him. I'm going to mask like a sun shape there. So I'm happy to leave it still with a bit of colour. I don't want it looking like the moon. I still want it to have some colour. So I want it to look like the sun. So we will take some orange in there, but not too heavy. Now, of course, once you've got some ink on the card, then you can go in directly because you've got some other ink there that it will give it a slip factor. But whenever you're starting on somewhere that you haven't got ink, go back to the side of the card and work in. And this is where you hold your breath and hope that you've got your words all nice and dry so they don't smudge everywhere when you go over them. We could, of course, stamp those in later, but then we'd need to give them plenty of time to dry because I want to add some embossing around the area as well. So it was just easier for me with this one to get them all stamped to start with. Okay, let's sneak right up to the Kookaburra there. Now we're going to end up with a bit of a straight edge on our branch because of the mask, but we'll fix that up when we come back in with some more detailed colouring later. Okay, so the other thing I want to place in here now is a mask that I've cut from acetate, clear acetate. And we're just going to pop that over there, which will give us more of a sun. And then we're going to add some more colour around the card. Where do we want it to be? Yeah, I think I want to include his eye in it. Okay, so now I'm going to come in with a number 10 size brush and pick up the next colour orange on our ink pad. Now these masks will be available on our website. And they'll come in a set of 3. Now that's got quite a bit of colour there, so I'm going to have to just keep going with my brush until it's blended out. Sometimes when you're working on gloss card, you actually get more slip happening with the inks than what you planned on, and you've just got to go with it. Of course, with the mask being out of acetate, you also will have a little bit of residue of ink on the mask, so careful you don't get all over your fingers, but it does mean that you can actually pick up more colour from there and keep working the colour from there out, and that will add more to your scene rather than having to re-ink. So I usually use post-it notes, but I'm finding the acetate is good that you can see where you're going. But yes, you do have to be careful that the ink just feeds off that into the card. You can use that to your advantage, or you can get caught out by it. Now, let's do a little bit of this colour down below as well. And down the sides. But we don't want to cover everywhere where we use the softer orange, so we'll stick it with it mainly to around our sun and around the edge of the card. Now let the acetate mask slip out of there. I'll give that a little bit of a clean later. Okay. Now let's just start doing some clouds, I think, before we start building up more depth, or should we go for the more depth first? Let's go more depth first. So let's pick up some of the deeper colour and we're going to pounce around the edge of the card. So pouncing is like stippling, but it's letting the bristles of the brush bend. Instead of stippling, which is straight up and down, we're letting our brush bend a little bit, and it means that the clean bristles on this side help to blend the ink out for you. So it's very important that your brush is facing, let's get this so that the camera can really see it, so the brush is facing off the edge of the card. If you're pouncing this way, or this way, you'll end up getting too much ink on the card that you can't blend out. So make sure that your edge of your brush is facing off the edge of the card. So you can pounce on your corner there, and then as there's a bit less ink on the brush, you can just follow it in until it blends beautifully in with your other colours. If you get too much ink, it's going too far and you're not happy, just use your previous colour brush, either patting or circling, just to move that colour back a little bit. So we're going to work around all the outer edge with this, so making sure that I turn the card around as I go, so that I'm always working with the brush so that it's a convenient angle for me. Now I'm just going to get my smaller brush there, just blend that edge off a bit. Don't try and go too far around the card before you do your blending, or else you'll find that the ink has dried. So we pounce, let it drift into the card a bit, and then if we're not happy, buff it back a bit with your other brush until we get it really nicely blended. Let's head down the side of the card. Again, just a little bit of buffing or circles, just tone it back a bit if you need to. I'm just making sure that we get the colours blending seamlessly in together. And you'll see I just keep turning my card around so that I'm always working with my brush at a comfortable angle. For me, if I start working around this way, I will start putting it directly on the card and not being able to get that blending. So I need to work with my brush facing away from me. But that's a personal thing. It's for you to work out what's the most comfortable angles for you to work with your brushes. But just keep in mind, keep that corner of the brush, sorry, that edge of the brush pointing away from the card. And let's just go up the last edge. You'll notice that how I'm hanging onto the card via the mask means I'm not putting my fingerprints on the card, and it just gives a convenient way to hang on to it. Right, so we're starting to look really good. So now let's get some clouds in. So we're going to go back to our previous orange brush and just pick up the middle colour orange. And we're going to put, now when we're wanting to do a thinner line with these brushes, if we press the brush down and just wiggle it across, we can get quite a good edge to it. And the bottom edge will be soft and blended because of the bristles of the brush. So pop that down, put some pressure on and wiggle it in, and then just sort of almost give it a little flick. We can soften that edge out if we like. I can make a bit of a wider cloud just by fluffing it on more. And I'm going to put the pressure on, give it a wiggle. But let's make it a bit fluffy as well. And I think we need one up the top there coming in from this side. I'm putting pressure on the brush so I can get an edge to it, and then I can just lift the pressure off and the cloud will drift off. Let's take this one, drift it in a bit more. Now I'm going to pick up the darker colour, put some pressure on and bring it in, but not quite as far. So we're just deepening the outer edges of our clouds. So putting a bit of pressure on so I get an edge to the brush. We're starting to look pretty good there. I think I just want the outer edge deeper though. So let's just do, I'm going to let that dry a bit and work on colouring the kookaburra, and then come around and add some more of the deeper colours out of the desert heat. So let's lift our mask off. And we've got our kookaburra there, lovely and white. So we want his belly to stay white, but we want to give a little bit of brown around the place. This is where we're going to come in with the denim, and we're going to pick up this grey-brown sort of colour. And this is where I use my number 2 brushes, the number 2 filbert. So it's given me a much more control over where I'm putting the colours. So this is just a browny grey colour, and we're going to colour the branch in with this. Now, of course, we could use browns out of the Autumn Leaves pad or the Cappuccino pad. They would look good as well. I was just trying to limit myself to using just 2 pads rather than my usual habit of getting about 5 different Kaleidacolor pads out at once and using them all. So sometimes it's good for me to challenge myself to just using a couple of colours. Now I want a little bit along the top of the branch, but we'll have it a little bit softer, which will give our branch a little bit of 3D quality. So I'm not re-inking the brush, I'm just dabbing a little bit of extra colour on. See how that makes the brush look a little bit more rounded? But maybe we're a bit light on this end, so let's just ink a little bit more. And just, now again, you'll notice I turn the card around because I want to put as I put pressure on the brush, it'll give me an edge to the brush like it did with the big one when we were doing the clouds. And I want to be able to push that edge right up to the edge of the stamped image. If I try and colour that top edge from here, I'm going to end up with my ink smudging out into the orange. So I have to turn my card so I can put the point of the brush, the edge of the brush, up to the edge of the stamped image. And you can see I've taken the brown a little bit past the edge of the branch there. As I said, we needed to just soften a little bit where the edge of the mask finished. And I'm just going to grab my orange brush and just colour a little bit of extra orange on there. Make it look like a cloud. And that again is just to soften that edge of the branch. Not quite happy with it, I'll just break it up a little bit. There we go. So now we haven't got a definite edge where that branch mask finished. Now we need to put a little bit of browny grey colours on him. And I'm going to just add a little bit to the top of his beak. So again, I turn my card around so I can place that colour in just where I want it. If I've got too much, I can just wipe off on my scrap paper. Don't ever scrunch your brush. These ones have quite a fine edge and you don't want to make them all fluffy and lose that edge, or you'll lose some of the colouring that you can do with them. So let a little bit dust down onto his bottom beak, but kookaburras tend to have a darker beak on top. Now he also has a little bit of brown coming out from his eye there, so I've just put a little bit of ink on my brush And we're just going to fluff that out. Don't want any solid edges there. And we do want to put some on his wings and tail as well. Now I'm leaving some of the wings quite patchy with the ink because I want to come in and add some blue in there as well. So we just put a few dabs of brown. And again on his tail, I'm just doing a few dabs because often their tails are quite mottly. Take off any excess off the brush. Dab a few little bits in there. If you want to, you could do a very little bit of shading around his edge. But they do usually have white bellies. So I don't want to take away from that. We could just do a few little dabs just where we've got those flecks to show that he's got feathers and on the chest there. Now let's grab another fine brush. So this is my, again, another filbert brush number 2, and I'll pick up some blue and we're just going to add some hints of blue into these wings there. I'm just touching really lightly. And now I'm happy with the Kookaburra. That's great. That's all he needs. He doesn't need a lot of colouring. So let's go back to our deeper colour on our Desert Heat pad and see if we can darken this edge off a bit more. And I'm just going to grab my Kookaburra mask and just, no, he's tacky. I'm going to grab a bit of paper towel. I don't want to put any fingerprints over where we've just done nice colouring. So I'm just going to lay that on to be able to hang on to the card while I work this bottom edge and build up a bit more depth of colour. That's better. Turn your card around. I don't think I'll go all the way up the sides. I think I just want to do the top and the bottom. So again, pop that paper towel down so that I'm not putting fingerprints where I've just put all that ink. And by giving it a chance for it to dry, it means that what I'm pouncing on now isn't taking away from our clouds. If I'd done it straight away, I probably would have smudged those out because the ink would have still moved. I'm just thinking we just need a little bit more in there. I want that really deep. And that's going to make the rest of the colours just pop. And now to the stage where we do have to use our heat gun. I want to do embossing over the top of this, which means that this layer has to be completely dry or our embossing powder is going to just stick to everywhere. But how fantastic are those colours looking. So let's get a heat gun out and do a good dry. So this is where I'm going to use the Wattle stamp. Which I'm just going to, while this is drying, I'm just going to grab that stamp. I've got all the other stamps out ready except that one. Might be Winter Branch in a minute, I think. Oh no, there's Wattle. We're all good. We're all good. Okay. Here's me thinking I was so organised with everything within reach and missed one of the crucial stamps. Ah dear. Never mind. Okay, we have Wattle. We have our large acrylic block. I have some Versamark ink. We're just going to give this a wipe with an anti-static pad, which will again help make sure everything's dry and also help our embossing powder just to stick to where we want it. I need a fine brush standing by just to tap off any excess powder, and I've already got my black embossing powder next to me as well. So let's start inking up. Now the Wattle stamp's got quite a few different types of wattles on it. So it'll actually look good if I use different parts of the stamp as I go around the card. And if you're not sure where you've stamped, you can lift your card up and just have a look and you'll see it being shiny where you've got the Versamark ink. Now because I haven't embossed the Kookaburra, it means that I can go over the top of him with some of these. So we're just going to pop some embossing powder on those bits that we've done and heat those, and then we'll move around the rest of the card. Make sure I've covered everywhere where I've put that stamped image. Grab our little brush, give your card a tap on the side and then a good thump on the back, and then have a look and see if you've got any grains of embossing powder where you don't want them. Now when you're doing a card like this at home, you can leave your card to sit for quite a while to make sure the inks are really dry before you do the embossing. In fact, you could create a couple of cards while you're waiting for them to dry and then come back in and do the embossing later on them all. But when we're doing a class or a demo, we need to keep moving, so that's why I've just got to check that everything's nice and dry before I keep going. But so normally you wouldn't have to heat dry your card before this stage. You could just leave it sit to dry. Okay, I think a bit down in this corner, and you know that might be enough. I often like to go all the way around, but let's rotate the stamp around and get a bit of a different part of the stamp coming up. I'm going to put my embossing on that and see how it looks, because I think that's going to be enough for this card. Just again, a double check to make sure there's no grains where we don't want them. Let's give that a heat. This is where the magic happens. Let's just check that's not an odd bit that we don't want. Okay. Now whereas where I'm drying the card, I keep the heat gun moving. Here I hold it steady and just follow the embossing around as it heats. And you'll see it going lovely and shiny and raised as we melt that powder. And just a little bit coming over the Kookaburra, it looks fantastic. And yep, I think that is enough. Let me move my scrappy pad out of the way so you can see the colours better. Now I think if I was using more colours of ink pads, I think I'd like to have a little bit of the yellow off the Riviera and just make that sunshine there more sun looking instead of moon looking. But I was trying to work with just the two pads to see what we could come up with just two. So I really like that. But yes, I think I'll come back and probably add just a little bit more yellow around there just to stop it looking like a moon. Okay, so that's a glossy scene. Aren't those colours fabulous? When the depth that we get with that red is just beautiful. Oh, thank you, Matthew, for going in for another close-up for me. I just love how we've built up the depth around the edges there. And I really like it just doing the wattle around some of the sides, and not, because of having the text there, not doing the wattle all the way around. I think that just really adds to it. Lovely. So that's a glossy scene with Kaleidacolor Inks and the Catherine Pooler Midnight Ink on our gloss card and put on with our brushes. Hope you enjoyed watching that, and we'll be back soon with another tutorial. Okay, thanks.